Hello everybody, P691000 here. Today we're going to be doing something that's going to be a lot of fun. For me personally, I'm a big history buff, and my favorite day of the year is Independence Day. Greatest country in the world, the only country in human history to ever set the common man and woman free. Nobody in human history had ever been truly free until the establishment of this country, the United States of America. And like I said, this is my favorite day of the year. I'm a history buff, and something we've never done on this channel is talk about the ghosts of the Revolutionary War. So that's what this video is going to be about. I hope it's as much fun for you as it is for me, and let's get into it. So first on our list is the Screaming Lady of Fort Mifflin. One of the many ghosts reported to have been seen and heard in Fort Mifflin over the years, the Screaming Lady is the loudest. She has never been seen, but wails from the old officers' quarters, where she appears to be living out her eternity of regret. Fort Mifflin was originally constructed by the British in 1772 on Mud Island in the Delaware River. It is 15 miles south of Philadelphia and across the river from Fort Mercer at Red Bank, New Jersey. Once war broke out, Patriot troops garrisoned the fort and renamed it after Philadelphia native and Quaker General Thomas Mifflin. Armed with artillery, both forts, along with gunboats, were engineered to prevent British ships from passing up the river from Delaware Bay to Philadelphia. After Philadelphia fell to the British on September the 26th, 1777, the forts became a nuisance to British shipping, preventing the British fleet from supplying the city with much-needed supplies. For the British, their capture became a priority. What befell the brave colonial defenders became the greatest bombardment to take place on American soil. Tens of thousands of rounds of cannon were fired upon the fort for several weeks. Some estimates put it as 1,000 rounds every 20 minutes. The colonists held fast, but defeat was imminent. It came on November the 16th, 1777, resulting in over 3/4 of the garrison perishing, while the rest abandoned the smoky ruin. The fort was rebuilt 20 years later and served as a garrison in the War of 1812 and as a prison. It was believed that the sustained and extreme violence of the bombardment, along with the fort's use as a prison that lasted decades, is ripe with paranormal activities. Legend has named the Screaming Lady's tortured soul. She is Elizabeth Pratt, an 18th century neighbor of the region whose daughter had a relationship with an officer. Elizabeth renounced and threw out her daughter, who died shortly after from dysentery. Consumed with guilt at consigning her daughter to this fate, the story goes that she took her own life. In the dank confines and drafty corridors, Elizabeth will release a sudden blood-curdling scream, thus solidifying the tale of the shrieking woman. She's not the only spectral sound to be heard at the fort. Near the blacksmith shop, the rhythmic clash of hammer against an anvil can often be heard, only to be silenced when people come by to peer into the empty but slightly iconic room. Hospital Horrors. Colonial Inn, Concord, Massachusetts. Among locations of intense pain, suffering, and death, ripe for paranormal energy, are the homes and inns that served as Revolutionary War hospitals. 18th century medicine practice was extremely limited by today's standard, with no anesthesia. Dragonite and scant methods dealing with infection, surgical equipment borrowed from the local blacksmith, and amputation, the normal procedure for the large caliber shot that shattered bones and tore through muscle. With only 400 certified doctors of the estimated 1,400 practicing physicians, most were aides and apprentices learning on the job, one can only imagine the hell many soldiers faced. One such makeshift hospital was the Colonial Inn in Concord, Massachusetts, presently at 48 Monument Square. Originally built in 1716 by James Monott, the home has been passed around by several family members through the decades. At some point in the 1770s, a third building was constructed next to the original. Prior to and throughout the war, the inn was used as storage to stockpile supplies including weapons, powder, and shot. But most dramatically, it served as a hospital for the sick and wounded soldiers from the war's opening salvo to its conclusion. What is now room 24 of the inn used to be the operating room during the war. Just down the hall is room 27, the morgue, which was rarely empty in those days. Sickness killed more soldiers than those in battle. Smallpox and typhus among the main culprits. Of these wounded, a quarter would succumb to their injuries, many more suffering lifelong debilitating trauma. Today, guests have noted strange occurrences happening in these rooms and elsewhere in the inn. This includes lights and TVs flickering on and off, hearing voices that come from nowhere, and bizarre floating orbs. The often reported main attraction is the apparition of a woman named Rosemary. Believed to be a nurse at the inn during the war, she can be seen misting down hallways and hovering about the many rooms. One couple recently informed the manager of an encounter in room 24. The wife had woken up to see a grayish figure, almost like a silhouette, moving from the bed to the fireplace. Then it disappeared. A doctor seeing a silhouette of a woman after yet another amputation. Or perhaps a patient slipping off the table to escape the surgeon's knife. Vexed Ghouls, Copp's Hill, Boston. The granddaddy of paranormal activity, cemeteries. King of B-rated movies, where ghoulish arms burst through the soil and stiff-legged zombies strut their stuff. And what better burial ground to immerse oneself in spooky encounters than a cemetery where the residents have been thoroughly pissed off. Copp's Hill, Boston, the second oldest cemetery in this revolutionary hotbed. Since 1659, named after a true alteration, Copp the Cobbler, it is an elevated in now what we call the historic North End. Though over time it has been leveled by 7 feet to fill Mill Pond, bordered by Hull Street, Charter Street, and Snow Hill Street. After the ruffians and rabble chased and hemmed in the British on Boston Peninsula, these passionate patriots compounded British misery by cutting off foreign parties desperate for food and supplies. After a nasty affair on Noodle and Hogg's Island, both now gobbled up by the landfill and a rather noisy airport, in which British livestock were killed or driven off, British Commander General Thomas Gage and most of his army were bent out of shape. Enraged, if you like, the general decided to construct a battery at Boston's North End on a hill that overlooked rebel positions across the river, one that happened to be laced with numerous tombstones. After the metal bayonets were hauled to the summit and the battery constructed, offending the nocturnal residents lingering 6 feet under, matters worsened. British gunners and troops sanctioned among the 24-pounders saw among the cluster of tombstones a means to take out their pent-up frustration, and no doubt a means to stave off boredom. With little or no regard to the poor souls encased in eternal slumber, they levied muskets and blasted away, practicing their marksmanship by turning headstones into Swiss cheese, most likely preceded by a generous draught of rum and ale, to be followed by loud cheering and hurled oaths towards the pesky patriots. One headstone in particular received the most punishment, that of Captain Daniel Malcolm. He was a smuggler and British agitator who once railed over 400 men and boys to prevent the British from confiscating his contraband wine. Illness overtook the industrious patriot smuggler in 1769, who commented just before death that he wished to be buried 10 feet deep so he'd, quote, be safe from British bullets, unquote. Seems the scarlet-clad troops unleashed a barrage of lead in Malcolm's direction to remind the captain of his deathbed wish. Today, Copp's Hill Cemetery is rife with paranormal activity. No doubt, the restless souls still steaming after their rude treatment. So much so that some Bostonians refuse to even venture near the place. Everything from strange lights and muffled cries and painful groans to even shadow figures have been seen lurking among the ancient tombstones that still display chipped stone from the British lead. Troubled souls driven by the indignation of their peppered gravestones, their legacy scarred and scattered to the wind, even to stiffen their resolve to seek revenge, a haunting vengeance that continues to this day. Understandable. What's 250 years when you have all eternity to take out your anger? Tortured Souls, Jockey Hollow, Morristown, New Jersey. Object pain, starvation, suffering, and unfathomable misery, what Washington's Continental Army faced at Jockey Hollow during the winter camp of 1779 through 1780 was the stuff of nightmares. Agony far greater than that endured at Valley Forge 2 years earlier. It was a winter of no less than 28 snowstorms, with drifts as high as 15 feet and temperatures that plummeted below zero for weeks on end. Destitute of funds to provide food, blankets, winter clothing, and the barest means of survival, 10 or more men were forced into cabins barely large enough to accommodate 2. Death and despair accompanied men on their daily struggle to stay alive. And down the hill from their drafty huts sits a boulder. It serves as a grave marker for roughly 100 soldiers whose remains lay likely scathed with beneath the soil. Literally a cauldron for restless spirits. No wonder it has seen its share of ghostly sightings. Numerous paranormal activities have been reported by hikers, visitors, and particularly reenactors. Common among the sightings is a group of soldiers marching lockstep through the dense trees. Shadowy outlines of soldiers have been seen darting amongst the huts. One reenactor, staying the night in one of the reconstructed cabins, was heading to the lantern when fife and drum music erupted right next to her, ending just as suddenly. During the quarter winter months, one spirit has been witnessed multiple times wandering the well-worn trails. She is a translucent apparition of a woman carrying a lantern and wearing a long white colonial-style dress. And in one of the park's guest houses, visitors have seen a brown dog chasing the owner's cat around the house until the canine suddenly vanishes. Journals of soldiers write that men were so desperate for food some ate their pet dogs. Could that pooch be the same that met an ultimate demise at the hands of his owner so long ago? This particular story has a special place in my heart. Mad Anthony Wayne is one of my favorite Revolutionary War figures, and the exact picture that you're seeing on screen right now is actually hanging on my wall. I love Mad Anthony Wayne, and this story actually taught me something I didn't know. So this story is called No Bones, or Lost Bones, About It. General Mad Anthony Wayne, the name alone conjures up a soul whose passion for conflict is bigger than life and perhaps too bigger than death. In this case, as his present-day ghost wanders along Route 322 in Pennsylvania every January the 1st. He may be mad as hell over bumbling soldiers and their poor choice of transportation. Or maybe a Native American curse scorned this Revolutionary War hero's soul to eternal restlessness for leading an army that forced First Nation folks from their ancestral homes. Born on January the 1st, 1745, in Palawa, PA, by age 32, Wayne was promoted to Brigadier General in the Young Continental Army. A renowned fighter, this man was as stubborn and fierce of a commander, earning accolades at the battles of Germantown, Monmouth, Stony Point, and Brandywine, where his 4th PA Regiment had the highest casualties of the war. So too, Wayne's men suffered severely from a British surprise midnight bayonet attack, led by no other than the Earl Grey of Tea namesake. His men known for their unleashed brutality, the Palo Massacre. It has its own present-day guided tours of mystifying apparitions of troubled phenomenon that left over grounds that had been soaked in blood. After the war, and a short stint as a state politician, Wayne was chosen by Washington to lead American forces west against First Nation people in Ohio. The Battle of Fallen Timbers occurred on August the 20th, 1794, resulted in the mass exodus of Native Americans from their ancestral homes. In 1796, while negotiating with the British over their outpost that still lined America's frontier, Wayne, aged 51, succumbed to what was termed gout. He was buried at Fort Pressley Isle in present-day Erie, Pennsylvania. 13 years later, in 1809, his son, Colonel Isaac Wayne, ordered his father's remains to be disinterred and brought to Delaware County near Wayne's boyhood home in the southwest corner of the state. Had the family known what actions those tasks with hauling the general's bodies home would take, they may have let old Wayne lie where he was, in peace. After digging up Wayne's body, it was discovered to be remarkably well preserved. So much so that they decided not to haul such a ripe carcass nearly 400 miles. The stench, perhaps even too much for rugged wilderness soldiers. A present-day 6.5-hour drive along interstate in 1809 on dirt and military roads that waved over the mountains was a month or more of tedious travel. They decided to boil the body and remove all the flesh. The bones were collected and placed in a box to be carted east. The remaining flesh was returned to the Erie grave where the present-day Wayne blockhouse now stands. It is rumored that along the way, the box containing the general's bones had jolted about, spilling several bones that were lost. Reaching Delaware County, certain that no one was going to dig thoroughly through the bones to be certain that the skeleton was intact, What was left was buried in the family plot in Radnor, Pennsylvania, at Old St. David's Church Cemetery. Now, legend contends that the ghostly general, most likely with a reasonable sense that all is not whole, wonders the trek his bones had taken. His spirit can be seen each year on January the 1st, the day of his birth, trudging old Route 322. Encased in winter's icy breath, a translucent orb rambles along the vacant roads, its head scanning the terrain, looking for lost bones and skeletal scraps on one of the longest nights of the year. A wrenched guest, old Mad Anthony Wayne, is most likely doomed to tread for all of eternity. The Headless Century. Now, here is a ghost story that stands up to Ichabod Crane's nemesis, the Headless Horseman of Washington Irving's classic, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. The story of this poor hapless sentry who was on the wrong end of a dragoon's sword has a twist of clandestine intrigue. Add to the famous swamp fox, General Francis Marone, and an apparition who refuses to part with his oh so important anatomy, and we have a classic campfire tale to raise the hair on the back of listeners, providing it is told with just the right finesse. By 1780, the American Revolution had moved to the South after a stalemate in the North. With the falling of Charlestown, South Carolina, British General Charles Cornwallis forces overwhelmed the American defenders throughout the Carolinas. However, many patriot militiamen and factions of Continental troops reformed, and with the advent of General Nathanael Greene to take command, they eventually wore the British invaders down. One such rebel leader was named General Francis Marone, or of Swamp Fox fame. He used some pretty unconventional tactics to outwit and defeat the British, including the use of spies. One such spy was a young girl whose father was a wealthy loyalist. Now, some of Marone's men had been taken prisoner in Georgetown, South Carolina area. Annie, who later married Thomas Ferguson, was the daughter of large landowner Samuel Wragg, an owner of Winfield Plantation, a few miles outside of Georgetown. Though her father was a stout loyalist, his brother William had been given a plaque in Westminster Abbey upon his death. Anna supported the Patriot cause. When Marone's men were imprisoned at one of the plantation's outposts, Anna got a note off informing Marone. She told the Swamp Fox that the most of the British soldiers were attending a party at near my Mansfield plantation, and the Marone's men were guarded by only one dragoon sentry. That night, Marone took immediate action. He and his men rode to Winfield. The young sentry heard the thunder of hooves and called out, "Who goes there?" In the frail light, a rider suddenly burst from the night, and with one brutal slice with his sword, beheaded the sentry. Marone quickly rounded up his men and escaped. The sentry was taken and buried in an unmarked grave on the plantation. But the incident did not end with the death of the guardsman and the prisoner rescue. A few nights later, one of the plantation's servants saw a headless man staggering up the drive. He was dressed in a British uniform and coated with blood that dripped down from his severed neck. The bondsman ran and reported what he'd seen, but no one believed him. That is until a few nights later. Anna, the plantation's daughter, heard that she thought were hoof prints in the drive. She looked out her window to see a headless British officer climbing down off his horse. He stumbled towards the veranda and as she watched, he disappeared. Over the years, many other sightings of the headless ghost have been reported, either mounted or staggering along the roadside or driveways. As one witness observed, usually before the ghost is seen, strange noises are heard. Sometimes it sounds like the dissonant roar and clattering of the hooves of many horses. This appears just before nightfall. Then the ghost appears, an awful, gruesome sight to behold. More recently, it is nearer to Halloween when the headless sentry shows himself in unexpected places, including downtown Georgetown. Thundering hoofbeats usually announce his presence. However, it has been reported that when hooves are not heard, his arrival is announced by what sounds like chains dragging across the front porch. He always appears headless in a British Dragoon uniform. When not riding, he totters about with a pistol in his hand, some claiming his body shifts from side to side as if searching for his own head. Though one curious aspect, he might be a somewhat bashful ghost, for he always vanishes as soon as he is spotted. Obviously one of the creepier and more chilling paranormal experiences of the American Revolution. One witness some years back claimed the rush was well worth the fright. Alright guys, that has been my haunted ghost stories of the American Revolutionary War. I had a lot of fun doing this video. I know it went on for a very long time, and if you made it to the end, thanks. I appreciate it. I have to say that the headless British soldier ghost story was definitely my favorite. What was yours? I hope you guys have a great Independence Day. Be safe out there. Long live liberty. I love you all. Peace, love. Have a great day.